crucial for their life.
This conference will now be recorded.
So people did not care, almost didn't care about religious issues, about the way they will get married, if they will get married through the rabbinate or through a civil system. That's number one. Number two, why they didn't care, because who was living in Israel? 99.9% of the Jews were Jewish. So, I mean, who was crazy to make Aliyah 50 years ago if he was not really Zionist, passionate about his Judaism, about his Zionism? I'm not saying about being religious, but at least about his Zionism and about his peoplehood, as we say. But so, okay, so the wedding will be done by the rabbinate. Who cares? Number three, most of the families, I'm not talking about the North African ones, that all of them were traditional, but even those who arrived from the former Soviet Union, from Eastern Europe, these were people that were deeply connected to Jewish tradition. And even though they rebelled on the parents and they didn't eat kosher, or maybe they were violating Shabbat, but they were Jewish and they had a very warm point. They had a very warm heart to Jewish ideas, and to get married in a Jewish way was not something that was some against their values or against their rules. Now, coming to the 90s, 2000, 2010, into our time, that's before the corona. I'm skipping 20, 30 years. Well, the state of Israel, and before the corona, state of Israel in a total different situation. First of all, the economy and the security are, Baruch Hashem, we are one of the strongest countries in the world, and Baruch Hashem, we are very proud of it. So once people are strong, people have time to think about other issues than money to eat or security to save your life. You want to see in what way you want to live your life. Number one. Number two, and that's maybe more important, we are blessed with a huge wave of Aliyah since the early 80s until now. The state of Israel has received more than 1.5 million immigrants, primarily from the former Soviet Union, but not only from the former Soviet Union. And most of the immigrants did not come because of ideological reasons. They came because they wanted to escape from Russia. And I don't care why Jews come to Israel. As long as they come to Israel, we open our arms and we welcome everybody, and we want all Jews to arrive from wherever they are, including America. And North America, we don't care for the reason. We want them to be with us. They are brothers and sisters, and we want them to be with us. But all of a sudden, people realized that the law of return is something which is not very easy to live with, and there is a huge contradiction between the law of return and the law of marriage and divorce. Let me explain that so that you'll get it clear. As I told you before, David Ben-Gurion didn't know how to define Jews. Who is Jewish? So he asked 100 rabbis and spiritual leaders all over the world, and he got plenty of answers. So he concluded eventually that he will define who is Jewish. And how would we define who is Jewish? Whoever was Jewish enough to be sent to the concentration camps in Poland, whoever was Jewish enough for Hitler, יימח שמו, will be Jewish enough for us in the state of Israel to have a safe shelter. And that fit to the very basic definition of Zionism, of secular Zionism, that was established by Herzl, saying that the idea of Zionism, the idea of building the Jewish state, is to have a safe shelter for Jewish people all over the world. So whoever might suffer because of his Jewishness will get a shelter in the state of Israel. That was the idea. Now, according to the racist laws of Nuremberg, who was defined as Jewish, not whose mother was Jewish, and not his father was Jewish. Whoever his grandpa or his grandma from one side was Jewish, what was enough for the Nazis to be sent to the concentration camps. So David Ben-Gurion said the same thing will apply to whoever wants to make Aliyah. So, as I explained before, in the early 50s, 60s, nobody cared about that definition because nobody wanted to make Aliyah. But after the collapse of the communist Soviet regime, whoever who could escape to the West took advantage of that. So hundreds of thousands of people all of a sudden wanted to make Aliyah, and they wanted to be a part of Israel just because they wanted to escape from Russia. So we have here today, let's conclude, we have here today 1.5 million immigrants that arrived to Israel from former Soviet Union. Listen to the numbers. About between 30 to 40% are not halachically Jewish. And whoever who is Jewish, according to the chief rabbinate, has to prove that he is Jewish, because we don't trust, or the rabbinate doesn't trust the documents from Russia, because the documents, many of them were fake, because there was a whole industry of faking documents, not in order to cheat the rabbinate, but in order to escape from Russia. So whoever wanted to escape took advantage, went to a macher, to somebody that produces documents, asked him, please write here that my mother or my grandmother, whoever, is Jewish, and let's move on. So the rabbinate decided that whoever who made Aliyah since 1990 has to prove his Jewishness. Now, imagine that. I'm a secular family in Israel. I'm 18 years old, 19 years old. I go to the army. I meet a girl that serves with me in the army. Her parents arrived from Russia in 1995 or 1992. She is 100% that she's Jewish, just like I'm Jewish, because I'm not Shomer Shabbat and she's not Shomer Shabbat. But we all grew in Israel. And when they come to get married in the rabbinate tells to the girl, well, your parents arrived from Russia. Please show us documents that you are Jewish. And she doesn't know what to do with it. So all of a sudden, we realized that, or the secular society realized, that there is a huge contradiction between the law of marriage and divorce that actually forces the young couples to get married through the rabbinate, something that doesn't occur in no Western country in the world, and the law of return that brought here hundreds of thousands of people that, number one, are not Jewish, and the rest of them that are Jewish have to go through a process of proving your Jewishness, which doesn't matter what way you'll do that. If you handle that, even if you will behave in the best way in the world, you will treat them in the most friendly way possible, yet you feel insulted. You feel alienated by the fact that I have to prove I was called in bad names like Jid or other names that were added to my name in Russia, and here when I come I have to prove to somebody that I'm Jewish. All of a sudden, people realized that the relationship between state and church in Israel caused them a lot of problems. That's number one. Number two, in the 50s and the 60s, to think of flying to Cyprus when you didn't have what to eat, when you had to ask your cousins in America to send you egg powder in order to feed your children, to fly to Cyprus to get married was not an option. But I don't have to tell you, Americans, that to fly 45 minutes from one city to another city and to get married civilly there, for Israelis today, it's nothing. And if you take in consideration that you have a duty free when you leave the airport, and when you come back to the airport, it's even attractive to take your spouse to Cyprus or to Prague to a weekend, and then to register to get married. And then the state of Israel recognizes the validity of marriage, of civil marriage, once it's done outside the state of Israel. But you have to understand what's the price that we have paid because of that. We have to remember, Jews are very stubborn, as the Torah defines us, as Am Kshe Oreth. And whenever you coerce Jewish people to do something, especially in these days, if you coerce them to do something, there is a price for that. And once you control their lives with marriage, and once you tell them with this, you can get married, with this girl you can, with this girl you cannot, and I didn't talk about the public transportation yet and about other challenges, people reacted. And where did we see the reaction? We saw the reaction in the ignorance, in the hatred to Jewish values, to religious people. And we realized that, especially during the COVID-19. But before I will come to the COVID-19, I would like to share with you two stories that occurred to me as a rabbi of a secular city. More than 80% of the residents of Shoam, which happened to be a beautiful city, and the people here are amazing. We actually are located, when you come to Israel, sometime when the COVID will be behind us, and we'll start to fly again. So actually, Shoam is the closest city to the airport. When you land in Ben Gurion Airport, Shoam is 5 miles from the airport. So I'm surrounded with non-observant neighbors. A few years ago, my wife says to me, you know what, let's invite our neighbors for the night before Pesach to see how Bdikat Hametz looks like, how, we take the 10 pieces of bread and the kids hide them all over the house. And we're taking a candle, we're starting to search and to look after the 10 crumbs of Hametz. So we invited our neighbors and they said, okay, fine, we'll come. They went in, the parents with the kids. And then as it occurs from time to time, according to the Murphy laws, something has to go wrong. And one of the pieces was missing. And we didn't find. And my daughter that put the pieces did not remember, could not recall where she put this piece of bread. And the kids started to tease her and to blame her. Why did you do that? You've done it purposely. And all of a sudden, everything, the atmosphere that was so pleasant became so nervous. And my neighbor says to me, Rav Stav, could you explain me what's going on here? I mean, I'm used to know you as a relaxed person. How come everybody's here so nervous, so mad? What's going on here? So I explained him, well, there is one piece of bread that is missing. And we're looking after it and we don't know where it is, where it's located. So he says to me, so what's the problem? I have plenty of bread in my refrigerator. I can provide you whatever bread you need. Now go and explain him that the fact that he has so much bread in his home, that's a part of the problem. That's not the solution. Now, could you imagine a neighbor of the rabbi? He grew up in Israel, and he has no clue about what Bdikat Hametz is about. Nothing. He doesn't understand what's the concept. I'm not talking about the fact that he eats Hametz. I'm talking about the fact that he doesn't know that religious people should not hold Hametz in their home. He doesn't know nothing about the fact that he has bread that could not help me, nothing. That's one example. It sounds funny. It sounds like almost a joke, but that's the reality in the state of Israel. I'll give you another example. A few years ago, we have here a wonderful high school, a secular high school. Every year gets the best prizes of education in Israel. A few years ago, I get an invitation I get a phone call from the principal of the high school, urging me to come as quick as possible to the high school. So I go to the high school and I go to the principal's room, and I see a bunch of teachers sitting together, surrounding the table with very serious faces, and ask them what happened. And the principal tells me that they just came back from Poland for March of Living, and they met many groups in Poland. And in a few occasions, they met a group where Holocaust survivors that were accompanying the group when they had yet power to do that. I mean, today, most of the Holocaust survivors, or they don't live, or they are very old, and most of them do not escort groups anymore, even before the corona. So they were exposed to a group of students from Australia, from elsewhere, and the Holocaust survivors, in one of the ceremonies, was reciting Kaddish. So the students asked the teacher, what is he saying? And the teacher didn't know. The guides of the Yad Vashem didn't know to explain them. And the principal and the teachers themselves were shocked. They raised a generation of ignorance that have no clue about Kaddish. So they wanted me to come to explain what Kaddish is about, to explain them and to explain the students afterwards. So I said to them, look, I have no problem. I will do whatever you ask me to do. But we say Kaddish after somebody passes away. But Judaism doesn't begin with death. Judaism begins with life. This week's portion, we've just read, when Leah had her fourth child, she said, Apam odeh et Hashem, al ken kara shmo Yehuda. Now, this time, I want to thank. I mean, you just celebrated Thanksgiving a few days ago. Apam odeh et Hashem. I want to thank Hashem for the fact that He has given me 4 healthy children. Jewish people, the word Jewish, Yehudi, comes from the word Yehuda. And Yehuda comes from the word to thank, to express our gratitude to Hashem. Judaism begins with Modeh Ani Lefanecha every morning. It just ends with Kaddish. People's lives end with Kaddish. But when people get their life, they begin to thank. And just afterwards, towards the end of their lives, they finish with saying Kaddish. So I say I have no problem to explain what Kaddish is. But it's to think that Judaism will be perceived by the children is just as a value how to say Kaddish after somebody that passed away. It sounds a bit strange. And then we ended up that every year I will escort this delegation to explain them a bit about the life of Judaism, not only about what we say after death. But when you ask yourself, how did we raise a generation of ignorance that automatically led to hatred? And the reason, one of the major reasons, is religious coercion. Once Jews are coerced to do something they don't want to, they're not interested in, they will react in this way. And now we arrive to the COVID-19. Look, I'm not talking about politics, because politics, it's not because I don't understand in politics. I understand quite good in politics. Did you ever meet a Jew that doesn't understand in politics? I mean, there's a famous story that the Prime Minister meets the President of America and they debate about the question, what is more difficult, to be a president the president says to the prime minister, well, it's much more difficult to be president because I'm president of 350 million people. And the prime minister says, well, it's much more difficult to be a prime minister in Israel because I'm a prime minister of 9 million prime ministers. And that's much more difficult. And everybody in Israel thinks about himself that he's it could be a prime minister, and the only reason why he's not, just coincidental, because he was not elected, but actually he has all the talents to be a prime minister. So we all understand in politics, but what I want to focus on is not politics. I want to focus in a social issue, which disturbs me much more than the politics, and it should concern each one of us. One of the issues that we see in Israel today, that the approach to Judaism is absolutely influenced by that, is the fact that there is a connection between state and church. And therefore, when the government takes decisions, we always ask ourselves, are these decisions religious decisions or professional decisions? Is the fact that shuls were not shut down in the first 6 weeks of the corona, was this decision taken because of professional reasons, or was it done because of religious pressures? Is the fact that today the government does not care about the fact that none of the Haredi schools obeys to the rules of the Ministry of Health versus the secular and the modern Orthodox that try at least to obey to all the rules? Is this a professional decision, or is that a political, religious decision, etc., etc.? Now, the fact that the numbers in Israel are very, very clear. Now it's basically among the Arab tribe of the state of Israel, but a few weeks ago, it was about between 40 to 50% Haredi people that were sick or were died, and all the red cities, or most of the red cities, were Haredi. Was the fact that they were not shut down or were not put in lockdown? Was it because of professional reasons or because of political, religious reasons, etc., etc.? All this created a terrible image of religion, a terrible image of religious people, and a huge, huge hatred, a huge hatred. I mean, there are pictures, there are films that are broadcasted from time to time in Israel recently that you don't want to see them. You don't want to watch them. It reminds, I know that it's a crime even to compare, but it reminds us pictures from dark eras in Jewish history. And that's the price of that's the result of coercion. That's the result of ignorance, and that's the result of the huge connection between politics and religion. Here is what Tzohar started to do. Here's when 25 years ago, right after the murder of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, we, a group of modern Orthodox rabbis, started to establish an organization that its whole mission will be to bridge between tribes, to bridge between the secular tribe that feels alienated, feels coerced by the religious establishment, to try to help him to experience Jewish life in a way that he will feel that is not coerced. He will choose what to do. He will not be coerced. And that's how we started. We started 25 years ago by performing weddings for non-observant people. Since I know it's already 6:40, and I guess you will be mad at me if I will talk too long, and I guess I promised a few minutes for questions and answers. So I'll just be very brief. We started a project of marriages that became very, very popular among the youngsters. Today we perform every year almost 5,000 weddings for secular people. We realized the need of all immigrants to prove their Jewishness, and we started to help them to prove their Jewishness. We have a project named Shorashim, Roots, that helps every North American, South American, but primarily Russians and Europeans to prove their Jewishness in a trying to be most friendly, as friendly as possible. And then we expanded our activities. I can talk about it in an hour and I will not finish. So I will leave some questions for you if you want to, and if you don't want, it's also okay. Please feel free.
So Rabbi Stav, what do you do differently, and how, and what do you see the effects of what you've been doing in terms of the marriages?
Okay, it's a very important question. I guess if I would ask Rabbi Senior, when a couple wants him to perform his wedding, how many times did he meet with the couple before the wedding? Did you meet with the couple? I guess the answer would be at least once, maybe twice. I guess sometimes it could be even 3 times. You have to realize it never occurred in Israel that a rabbi of a representative of the local rabbinate will meet a couple before the wedding. Why? Because they didn't know who is the couple. It doesn't belong to his community. It's not a rabbi of a shul like the rabbi of Beth Jacob Irvine that has a community. This institution of community rabbis does not exist, or almost does not exist in Israel. No secular family, especially if they are Ashkenazim, no secular family is connected to a rabbi. So they go to the local rabbinate and they register to the rabbinate, and the rabbinate will decide who will be the rabbi depending on their turn, whose turn it will be to be a rabbi that is Misada Kiddushin. They have a list of rabbis, they have a list of couples, and they have to make a shidduch between them, and the shidduch will be done a day before the wedding, 2 days before the wedding. The way that the system works, they could never meet. That's one thing which is different. We insisted that every couple will meet the rabbi at least once at his home. We want them to have the experience of seeing the rabbi in his home with his home shoes, to see his family, to drink coffee together. For 99% of the secular Israelis, it's an experience they have never experienced before, to see a rabbi in his home, to talk to him, to see that he doesn't have horns on his head. That's number one. The second thing that we have done was that we said that the rabbis should come in time to the wedding. Now you can laugh, you can smile, but it was a big issue in Israel, because if rabbis want to make a lot of money, so they want to make 2 or 3 weddings a night, so one of the weddings they will be late. And there were stories in the media how rabbis pretended to have a flat in their car, and they show their hands how they were black from working with the flat tires that they had in the car, just to prove that the reason why they came late is not because they had another wedding, but because of other circumstances. And number 3, which is a huge issue in Israel, the rabbis were not allowed to charge money for the weddings. All of our rabbis are volunteers. Now, it's not because rabbis are not entitled to demand payment for the work. But number 1, if you are an official rabbi, you get your salary and you are not allowed to demand money. Number 2, this money was never declared. Now, it caused a huge Chilul Hashem. So we said we want to make Tshuvat HaMishkal. Tshuvat HaMishkal is to go to the other side. We say how people will volunteer, will not charge 1 penny from the government, from the couple. And number 4, let's talk together with the couple. What are his expectations in the ceremony? Maybe there are things that he wants to add, and where they are not contradicting to the halacha, and we could agree to that. But if the rabbi doesn't talk to them, doesn't know what they expect, doesn't explain them what is the ritual about, so how will they be able to fit expectations? So these were actually the 4 ways in which we changed the way wedding was done in Israel, and Baruch Hashem, a lot of success.
Thank you. Any other questions, please feel free. Unmute yourself, David.
I have a question. Hi, Rabbi Ofer. What kind of pushback did you get from the Rabbanut regarding marriages, regarding weddings and divorces?
We are not doing divorces, but about marriages, what could you think was a reaction of a monopoly that feels that all of a sudden there is a new player in the neighborhood? Not positive. I would say more than that. The chief rabbinate tried to make restrictions that will exclude all the Tzohar rabbis from being able to perform weddings. But after, I don't want to go into the details, although they are very interesting, but it requires another conversation. Eventually, today there is a law in Israel, and a decision of Supreme Court, a law in the state, in the Knesset, which is called, you can Google, Tzohar bill, which actually enables every couple to register wherever they want to, and couples are not restricted to get registered only in the rabbinate where they live, and that was because of Tzohar, because the rabbinate didn't want Shoham to become like Las Vegas, that everybody comes to register in Shoham. So there is a Tzohar that actually enables everybody to register in Shoham, and that's what Tzohar is doing today. And there is a decision of Supreme Court where the rabbinate had to give up, and to agree to the conditions we put, and to cancel all the restrictions they put upon Tzohar in the way rabbis should perform weddings, or who are the rabbis that are able to perform weddings. Today, most of these restrictions do not exist. But originally, the rabbinate tried to give a fight, but it wasn't possible because the public support is way behind any political dispute. I mean, from the right and from the left, we get a huge support to this project of marriages.
Ready for next question? Rabbi Stav, the problem of finding out if someone is halachaically Jewish seems like it couldn't be done with one meeting, even if it takes place in your house. You know, it seems a little more complex, and there has to be more digging and so forth. And so can you, do you feel that your authorization of halachaically Jewish, or that stamp, is as valid as, well, I guess the other rabbis just say, no, you're not Jewish. But how do you satisfy your good conscience that they are really Jewish?
Okay, it's a very important question. So let me explain that a bit deeper. Well, the rabbi, let's talk about the official rabbi, and then we'll come back to us. Of course, you're 100% right. No way that the best rabbi and the most professional rabbi will be able to prove Jewishness in one meeting. That's not the way it's done. Suppose people come to the local rabbinate. The rabbi has no tools to prove if somebody is Jewish or not. He doesn't have the knowledge. He has no way to prove it. Let's start with, he doesn't speak Russian. He doesn't read Russian. He doesn't know what's the meaning of these documents. So what the rabbi is doing usually is sending to the rabbinical court. Now, the rabbinical court also doesn't have a clue to read these papers. So next door to the rabbinical court, there is an office of somebody that is called Mevarer Yahadut, somebody that his job is to check Judaism on behalf of the Beis Din. Now, these people are limited with their resources, even if they have goodwill. They are very, very limited. And once he doesn't see a way to prove Jewishness, he says, well, as you said, I don't see any proof. I cannot rely on these documents, and therefore, for me, you are not Jewish. If you have a better way to prove that you're Jewish, go and do that. What we are doing in Tzohar is we established a special department, which is called Shorashim, roots, that we have today 4 offices in former Soviet Union, 8 offices in Israel, where we hire tens of experts that their job is to find the evidence that will prove that somebody is Jewish, and eventually we have to bring the files after we have concluded the decision that he's Jewish. We have to bring it to the rabbinic court that will approve it. I could tell you, we prove every year more than 4,000 families, and there isn't one case that the rabbinical court does not accept our approval, which means that our people today are considered to be the most professional people in Israel. And we have approach to the very, very secret, silent offices in former Soviet Union, offices of the Red Cross from World War II, offices of the KGB, NKVD, municipalities, archives that nobody knows how to get there. And from time to time, this I wouldn't record, we smear people in order to put our hand on documents. It's a very, very difficult work, as you are very right. It's not in one meeting, it's not in 2 meetings. It could take 3 or 4 or 5 months until we prove. And sometimes we say we have no proof. There was a story of a girl that came, and I could spend with you now at least 30 minutes, and nobody will fall asleep, trust me, with stories how we proved people Jewishness. But I could tell one thing that I'll share with you one anecdote. This case is from Russia, and it was broadcasted already in television. So you could, I would ask Rav Nevo to send you the link, and you could see the report in television. This boy, so there was one case that we couldn't prove, because the girl came over to us and said, I come from this and this village, and this village was completely burned out. Nobody was left, and no archives, no municipality. We know that there was a village, there were the 500 Jews, but nobody was left there, and there is no proof. So we asked her to convert, although we trust the story, but we couldn't prove it. So there were a few cases like that. I will share with you an anecdote from a boy that came over, not a religious, and he said to us, well, he came with a strange story. He said, well, my grandma is Jewish, but she grew up in a Christian family, and I'm Jewish. And he insisted to say I'm Jewish. She was adopted by them, but she's Jewish and they were Christian. So we asked him, could you tell us what's the story? Now listen to that story. You know what? I'm already crying when I recall this story. This grandma, her mother was married to a non-Jewish man. And the Nazis arrived to their village, and as they have done in Babi Yar, they took all the Jews to the forest nearby, and they wanted to kill them. The husband, the non-Jewish guy, said he will not let his wife to die alone. He understood what's going to happen. And he said to her, I'm going with you. But you know what? Let's send our daughter. It was 5 years old. It was a bit cool, a bit cold. So he said to her, you know what? Let's tell the girl to go back home and to wear a sweater, to take a sweater. And he asked his parents, his non-Jewish parents, please keep your eye on my daughter, because I'm not going, I will not come back from this terrible event in the forest. And that's exactly what happened. This girl grew up by her grandparents that were Christian and were not Jewish. Okay, it sounds fantastic. You know, it's an amazing story. And this girl, that by the way was raped by the Nazis, comes and tells the story, and the grandson puts his hand on her and says, well, grandma, you don't have to cry, you don't have to cry. Now, yeah, she comes with a fantastic story, which, I mean, every Jewish heart and every human heart could not stand in, but you have to prove this story. Who said that this story is true? So our people in Russia, in Ukraine actually, went to that village and started to look in the archives. And they found the names of the family and the names of the grandma that was taken to the forest. And they found the story in the ancient papers of the city that were telling a part of this story years afterward. Now, no rabbi could come to this story in one meeting, in 2 meetings. It's a work of months and sometimes even more than that. Now, we deal with this kind of stories only almost on a daily basis, every day. There are lots of stories like that, different kinds of stories, but the idea is the same. And it's a very holy work that we do in order to prove the Jewishness of these people.
Rabbi, thank you very much for sharing. I'd like to ask if you could. I'm not trying to create any sort of machloket at all, but I'm trying to understand. It sounded to me like there was a sense of somewhat of judgment of the letters that you were receiving from the animosity, the bitterness of the backlash, if you will, from the wedding from the Orthodox Jews in New York. If I understood correctly, no, you were.
I don't understand.
You
Please explain more the question, because I don't understand what you're talking about.
Did I misunderstand? Were you not referring to? Was that not the letters that you were referring to? What were the letters that you were referring to? That you were receiving?
I don't know. Did I mention letters? I don't remember mentioning letters.
Oh, maybe I misunderstood. All right, sorry.
He was not referring to any of the weddings in New York. He was no.
Oh, okay.
He
Okay.
Referring to there being animosity towards a lot of the ultra-Orthodox because of their not in Israel, for their not being careful with the protocols that the government had set up. He was not talking.
Okay. I thought it was in regards to the New York one. Okay.
No. Look, I have a rule. Whenever I'm asked a question in America about America, I explain that I have enough of my own. I don't intervene in internal American issues, and I have no clue about what, it's not only that I didn't mention that, I have no clue about what you're talking about.
I may ask a question, Rabbi.
Yes, please.
What I don't understand is why we're giving so much emphasis on this business when anybody wants to be Jewish. Today's world, people don't want to be Jewish. They're so afraid they want to be submerged among all the goyim. Now, if anybody wants to be Jewish, we have to be happy that somebody wants to be Jewish. Why don't we take that attitude? Because
well, first of all,
anti-Semitism, where people want to submerge. The intermarriage rate is very high in this country. I think it's about 75% for the non-Orthodox. And in Germany, in the 1930s, it was close to 40 to 50%. So Jews wanted to disappear. So we should be proud for anybody to be Jewish. And why give them so much trouble? This is what I don't understand. Could you explain that, Rabbi?
Yes, please. First of all, I think I understand your question very good. And I think maybe that's the main purpose of this discussion, to try to bridge between worlds, the American Jewish world and the Israeli Jewish world. I understand what you're saying 100%, because I've been visiting in the States many times, and I know I completely understand what you're talking about. But you have to realize that that's your experience, or the Jewish experience in America is that since people are, as Rabbi Sachs, blessed his memory, used to say, today we used to be the chosen people, not by choosing, by being forced by the nations to be Jewish, and today we became the choosing people. Each one of us, each one of our kids has to choose whether he wants to be Jewish or not, and many of them, unfortunately, choose not to be Jewish, to marry out, etc., etc., as you have pointed out, and you are 100% right. That's not the case in Israel. In Israel today, I mean, it's not a question for an Israeli, are you Jewish or not? I mean, of course I'm Jewish. Why not? Why should I not be Jewish? If I'm surrounded, let's take for a minute, let's not talk about the Arabs. But if I exclude the Arabs from the story, I'm surrounded with 7 million Jews. Why should I not be Jewish? The opposite. Many people want to come to Israel because Israel is such a strong and a beautiful country, and they want to be a part of this. So even if they are not Jewish, they want to be a part of the Jewish people. That's our experience. Now, it's a question of point of view. When you feel that people are running away, you want to keep each one of them near you, next to you, and that's why you can. That's where your question comes from. But when you live in a society that feels that is very empowered, very enriched, and everybody wants to be a part, you know, it's like you won the lottery, and then all your friends remember that they are close relatives to you. You know, there is a joke in Israel that when Menachem Begin became prime minister, all of a sudden, all the Israelis remembered that the parents were in Altelena, or were members of the Etzel, of the Irgun, that used to be the underground, that Menachem Begin was his commander. When Mapai was in the government, so then everybody belonged to the Haganah. And when Menachem Begin became prime minister, everybody started to remember that he's a member, that he was on the ship of the Altelena and other organizations that were engaged to Beitar or to the Etzel. So when Israel is successful, and then everybody recalls that he's Jewish, that's the way it's perceived in Israel. I fully understand what you're saying, that in America it's the other way around, and that's why there are different approaches to that. But yet, nevertheless, I fully agree with you, and that's why actually we in Tzohar, we sacrifice our lives in order to help whoever who wants to be Jewish and is halachically Jewish. We will make sure that we will not lose him, that we want him to be bound to the Jewish future, and want him to be proud to be a part of the Jewish nation, and we want to engage him to Jewishness.
Interesting. Yeah. One point would be, my recommendation would be, we should be more inclusive should be happy to have people there.
You're 100% right. I think I couldn't
You're on
say
the
it better.
right track, Rabbi. You're absolutely doing a good job. But inclusivity is important. When I spent a year in Israel, I felt the first time in my life I felt at home. I was among my own people. That's the feeling you have when you are Jewish and you stay in Israel. That's a feeling that everybody who comes to Israel should feel the same way. And I guess what we're up against, I think what you're up against is a power struggle. It's
Right.
right? Is it not? Control.
No, you're 100% right.
And so I feel very sad about this because we cannot afford, Israel cannot afford to be in this position when you're surrounded by enemies. I guess our enemies do more for us than anybody else. They're keeping us together.
You're 100% right. And that's why Ben Gurion wanted the definition of Jewishness. By the way, it was not completely wrong because, as you know, as we all know, the first one to define the Jewish people as a nation was not Hashem, was not Moshe Rabbeinu, it was Pharaoh. And Am Bnei Israel Rav Atzum Mimenu. In the first book, we see the Jewish people as a family. Mishpacha, the family of Yaakov, goes to Mitzrayim. But the first one to realize that it's not a family anymore, it's actually it's a nation, was Pharaoh. So many times it's our enemies that help us to define ourselves better than we do.
In fact, I don't think we would have survived for 2,000 years if it wasn't for anti-Semitism. They kept us separate. It's the only thing.
So Rabbi Stav, you're very much in the trenches and doing amazing work, and we've gotten gained an understanding in the challenges. But can you leave us with some optimistic hopes and projections for Am Yisrael and for Eretz Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael?
I think yes. I think we see from all over a deep thirst for spirituality. We see it from wherever we touch, wherever we go. People, just like I've mentioned in the beginning, the ignorance, the hatred, but yet we see, despite all this, we see that wherever we talk, wherever people come to speak, wherever we are, people want to understand. People want to know more. People understand that our culture and our spirit is much deeper than just making shopping in Black Friday or in other events, or when the government has opened the malls. We want more and we need more. I could tell you just one example. Just a few weeks ago, we started a new initiative to make Kabbalat Shabbat for secular families. And we started to talk about this idea among secular organizations. And we're having now lots of partners, secular partners, that said, wow, that's what we need. We need to deepen our connection to Shabbat. We need, with no coercion, with no judging, etc., all the things that Jews don't like. There is a lot of work to do. And when we feel that there is a lot of work to do, it means that there is a huge hope in the end of the tunnel. Bezrat Hashem, together.
Thank you very much. And Rabbi Stav, I think you really speak to a very receptive chord to the Beth Jacob community in terms of making sure that everyone feels respected and everyone feels connected and everyone recognizes that they are an essential chelek, an essential part of Am Yisrael. And we're all in this together. Otherwise, we don't stand a chance. And Rav Nevo, if there are other ways that you can help to bring connection between the Beth Jacob community and Tzohar. I'm sure many of us would be very interested in ways that we can be involved and have a chelek in the important work that really, like I said, like you said, in American community, I can't imagine doing a wedding if I haven't met with the people and gotten to know them. And one of the first things I say to them is, there are certain things that need to be done according to halacha, but besides that, there's so much openness. So how have you envisioned your wedding? And let's make this a wedding that will be halacha, and it will be the wedding. So this really speaks to our understanding of how we need to move forward and how we connect to one another. So we're certainly interested in seeing ways that we can further the connection. And thank you very much. We recognize it's very early. It's very early for you there in Israel. And we appreciate your waking up so early to accommodate our time schedule. And we wish you just continued success and koach and bracha in the
Thank you
beautiful.
so much, and good evening to everyone here. Rav Nevo, you wanted to say something?
No, everything's. I just want to say, Rabbi Senior, thank you very much for having us, for having Rabbi Stav speak, and for having us join your community.
It was our privilege, our
privilege.
pleasure, our privilege. So thank you so much.
Hopefully you'll
Thank
speak
you,
again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Very
much.
welcome. See you soon. Bezrat Hashem.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll let you know about future speakers that we're going to be having. Okay. In about a month's time, we'll have another speaker that's being lined up right now. And we'll share all the news and all the details as we go forward. Thank you all for joining. And Laila Tov, everybody. Be well, be safe. And we'll see you soon, we hope. Okay. Laila Tov, good night.